In this lesson, I want to talk about the management of DHCP. Through the DHCP console, at the root level, I can right-click and I can say Manage Authorized Servers. This would show me all the authorized DHCP servers that have been authorized to Active Directory. Now you'll notice I also have a WDS server. This is Windows Deployment Services. This itself acts as a DHCP server in a way. It responds to requests for information, but instead of offering IP addresses, it offers operating systems. Now, just as a point of interest, these are on different servers, but they're in the same subnet, so I don't have to do anything. A machine that was booting on the network would send out a request, it would get an IP address offer from the DHCP server, and an OS offer from the WDS server. What if I installed WDS on my DHCP server? That's actually okay. It should handle itself automatically. What you can't have though is WDS trying to listen on port UDP 67. That's what DHCP listens on. So you would make a change that would essentially say, don't listen on port 67 on WDS, and then you'd have to tell DHCP to act as a Pixy client. I offer the service. So my scope options on the server, I don't actually have it on this box because I don't have WDS, but I would have a 60 and it will be set to Pixy client. Now, what if there was a WDS server, but it was actually running on a different subnet? Well, the preferred way to handle that is on the router itself. I would configure the router to listen to the broadcast from machines sending out those Bootp requests, and it would handle advertising out the WDS service. Alternatively, I can actually configure that in DHCP itself. You'll see there is the option 66 and 67. 66 is where I could set the name of the WDS server. 67 is where I would set the boot file. So the boot file could be boot/x64/pixyboot.com if it was 64-bit. So I can do this configuration from within DHCP itself. Moving on from that, at the server level, I can perform a backup. I could back up to a certain location. I can restore. I can stop, pause, restart the service. If I look at the properties, there's actually the path of my database itself. And here I can actually change it. I don't obviously want to do that right now. If I just select that quickly, and we look in there, these are the files that make up the DHCP database. The main files in here will actually see the DHCP MDB file. This is the actual database file itself. We'll also find a temp EDB file. This is a swap file used during various database index maintenance operations. I'll see log files. I'll see the j50.log, and then I'll also see a number of additional JRS files. These are used to recover data if required. There's also a checkpoint file. These are all the files that actually make up the DHCP service itself. DHCP also has a backup path. By default, DHCP backs up itself every 60 minutes. So we'll go back to this folder, looking back up, we can see there's the configuration and there's a copy of the data. So in a worst case scenario, I'm only actually going to lose at worst 60 minutes of actual data, providing I have that backup somewhere else. Talking of somewhere else, I can actually take a lease and I can export it out. So if I jump over to PowerShell, I can actually do an export DHCP server, the server I wish to export, and I can say I want to export out all of the leases as well. So not just the scope information, but the addresses I've already leased out. I can specify a file. So I'll just say my DHCP XML, and we can say verbose to show us everything it's doing. If I then looked at that file, so I could say notepad dhcp.xml, that's the full configuration, all of the leases of my DHCP server. So if I wanted to move maybe this configuration from one server to another, I could take that file and I could then import it into the new DHCP server. So I could then use import DHCP server, the new name. I would say once again I want to bring in the leases and then the file. At that point, I would restore the state to my new server. And I can use NetShell as well. With NetShell, I can go into DHCP and then run an export and an import as well. So that's another way I can actually import and export that data. Next, at an IP level, I can right click. If I scroll down, I can actually look at my properties of this. Audit logging to actually track the activity that's happening on the DHCP server. How I integrate with DNS. Do I register records to dynamic DNS on behalf of the DHCP clients? And here are the options for what I should do. Notice I also have DHCP name protection. A machine gets, for example, an IP address. It would then register to DNS its IP to name record. With name protection, it also configures an identity on that record. It's really designed to stop someone else trying to hijack that record, then maybe redirecting it to their IP address and thereby taking the traffic that's really not meant for them. I can enable this at both IPv4 and IPv6. I can specify an allow and deny list for particular MAC addresses, so I could block giving out IPs to certain MAC addresses. I can see my failover relationships. This is what I would actually create when I was setting up failovers for the first time. Notice I can specify the load balancing mode. Was it a hot standby? I can enable message authentication through a shared secret. And I can also look for conflict detection attempts. This is very useful if maybe I created a scope on a DHCP server and it was actually used before and I didn't carry over the lease information. So maybe IP addresses have been given out and I don't want to give it out again. If I set this to saying non-zero, it will try and check on the network, is this IP address already being used? If it is, then it won't give it out. It will assume it's already been leveraged. I can specify the path to the audit log. I can change my various bindings to adapters, and I can actually specify a credential to use as part of the DNS dynamic update that I might do on behalf of my clients. I only really need to do this if my DHCP server is running on the domain controller itself, which in my case it is. Otherwise, registrations could fail. So I actually have a special account that I created, and this is the account used by DHCP when it registers names to the DNS service on behalf of the clients. Now you may wonder, why is it a big deal if the DHCP service is running on a domain controller and it's registering records on behalf of clients? Well, normally the records that are registered are done using the computer account of the DHCP server. In this case, it would be a domain controller. But the problem is, what if I have multiple DHCP servers and that DHCP server now exclusively owns the record that it registers to DNS? That would mean another DHCP server would not be able to overwrite that record, which I want it to be able to do if it in the future gives out the address. And so there's a solution. It's actually called the DNS update proxy. And when I add machines to this, it doesn't secure the records. So another DHCP server could update the record. But if my DHCP server is a domain controller, it would mean all of the domain records that are written to DNS would be unsecured. And that's very dangerous. And so by setting this credential, the records are still secured, that it does for those dynamic updates. So if I run DHCP on a domain controller, just create a regular user account, doesn't need really any special privileges, and that will get used to do the registrations. If you experience problems with DHCP, one of the things might be you've run out of IP addresses, your lease is full. You can always look at the icon and it will give you an idea if there's a problem. It will change to a warning or an error. I can check the event logs. So Server Manager is a good place to look for various events that may be occurring around the service for DHCP. Additionally, I can run the best practice analyzer. So this would run through all the various scans related to the services and then find if there are problems on the configuration. So I recommend you run that. So here it's saying, hey, there were some options that are missing. There were some errors. So I would go through these. I could look in detail how to resolve them and apply those to my configuration. Don't forget, if I've enabled the audit logs, I can always jump to the DHCP folder and I'll have those various logs for each day of the week.